Welcome, everyone, to the July 2023 edition of Cabaret Conversations through the 92nd Street Y New York School of Music. Of course, as always, I'm your host, Michael Kirklane, and I am thrilled this month, our second episode of season 4, to be joined by Ben Rimalower, someone who has extensive experience in this art form as a performer, as a director, and now as a booking manager. Ben is currently the director of programming for Green Room 42, also with a hand in Chelsea Table and Stage. His solo show, Patty Issues, was a New York Times Critics Pick and also earned him a Manhattan Association a Cabaret Award and a Bistro Award. He is the writer. As a writer, he's been a contributor for Vulture, Playwright, Playbill, and HuffPost. As a director, he has won acclaim for his work with Leslie Kritzer and also The Countess Luann, which translated into 4 seasons of him also being on The Real Housewives of New York. Please welcome to Cabaret Conversations, Mr. Ben Rimalower.
Hi, so good to be here with you.
I am so thrilled to have you be part of Cabaret Conversations, Ben.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Well, as the typical musical theater people we are, I always like to start at the very beginning. A
very good place
to start.
There it is.
So, how did you, Ben, first find your love of musical theater and the arts?
Well, I was born in Fort Lee, New Jersey, and my parents had grown up in the Bronx, and my grandparents were all very into Broadway musicals and would take me to see shows. And then we moved to Manhattan when I was 3, and I guess that's when I started seeing shows. I don't think I saw anything when I was 2.
Before 3, yeah.
But I saw like Sandy Duncan and Peter Pan, and I saw Annie, and what else did I see? Barnum, not Barnum, Barnum, The Wiz. I don't know why I confused Barnum and The Wiz. And I've talked
about very different shows.
Very different. I really wanted to see Evita because I was in love with the commercial, and but they said it was West Side Story I saw, and I cried and had to be carried out during Debbie Allen's rape scene. So that's why I thought Evita was for sure too mature.
Too much.
But my grandparents would play show music for me, especially Fiddler on the Roof. And, they were on LP. So I would get scared during Frumacera in the dream sequence, and they would put it on the chipmunk speed so that I wouldn't be afraid. And then we moved to California, to LA when I was 5. And I always missed my grandparents and New York and Broadway. And it was really not a part of my life until junior high school, when, like many people, I kind of just, gravitated toward musical theater. And musicals were very popular at that time with people I was, my classmates, because Les Mis had been a big sensation, and Phantom of the Opera also. And Phantom of the Opera was in LA with Michael Crawford and Judy Kaye. So it was like a big status symbol to have seen, because it ran for 4 years in LA. And we could get student tickets for like $15. So, I mean, I don't think I was doing that when I was 12, but certainly when I was 15, I was going to see Phantom all the time, it seems like. And my sister and I would subscribe to Civic Light Operas, kind of all around Southern California, so we could see Carol Burnett in Company, or like, sort of small town productions of Evita, where the woman that played Ava also designed the wigs. And although she did herself no favors, I'm sorry to report. But I was just really all in at that point. And Cabaret was something that I guess I also discovered in LA around that time. There was not, I don't think Cinegrill was even open yet when I was in high school. Certainly not when I was in middle school. But there was weird things. Like there was this venue in like a mini mall in Studio City, which I want to say was called Dietz and Schwartz, but that sounds absolutely wrong to me. But it was Dietz and something, because Susie Dietz, the producer, was one of the owners of it. And I used to go see stuff all the time there that like Terry Ralston would direct or star in, and Bonnie Franklin did shows there. And I was like so obsessed because my friend had given me a video of different Tony Awards clips. And so I was obsessed with, I'd grown up watching Bonnie Franklin on One Day at a Time, but Bonnie Franklin did Applause. And so to see her actually sing all these songs, and same with Terry, who I was obsessed with from Company and from The Baker's Wife, because I was immediately a huge Patti LuPone fan. So that treasured cast recording. So I was just really into all that stuff, you know, and it was all via CDs and you know, Theater Week magazine and Show Music magazine. And when we would come to New York to visit our grandparents once or twice a year, every moment that I was allowed to steal away from the family, my sister and I would go. We would take the Riverdale bus down from the Bronx to Times Square and see, you know, we saw Falsettos and Guys and Dolls and The Secret Garden and, you know, Angels in America, all kinds of shows. I mean, that was another thing that really, even though it wasn't a musical, there were all these gay plays, Jeffrey and Love, Valor, Compassion. Well, and Kiss of the Spider Woman and Falsettos were musicals, of course. And it was really, you know, there was no gay representation in television and film at that time. I mean, I'd seen Boys in the Band once on TV in the middle of the night when we were on vacation somewhere and I couldn't sleep. And it had like traumatized me. And of course, now I watch it and I'm like, yeah, it's pretty much how it is.
That's how it is. Yeah.
At the time, I was like, oh, like those horrible people. So it was really great to see these queer characters on stage in a way that I wasn't seeing elsewhere. And I was just hooked. All I wanted to do was come to New York and work in theater and musicals and cabaret. And I went to UC Berkeley because my parents told me they would pay for me to go to a state school, but not, I really wanted to go to NYU, but they would only, but I certainly had no ambition to pay for school myself if they were willing to pay. And these were great state schools, UC Berkeley. And of course, if I was smart, I would have gone to UCLA or UC Irvine, where they have great theater programs. But I just was in love with San Francisco and the Bay Area. And so I went to Berkeley and the program was terrible, even though I loved being a student there. But there was no musicals at all in the drama department. So I started a student theater company called Bear Stage, which is actually still around today. I'm very proud to tell you.
That's amazing.
And it's much come along far distance from the humble beginnings of my incarnation of it. But it was, in a way, it was great. I mean, I wasn't getting training, but I was able to just be sort of, I once heard George Wolfe refer to his college years as his Eva Perón period. And it was, you know, this was that for me. Or, you know, I mean, I thought I was Jerome Robbins the way I talked to these poor actors, my classmates, but I was the only student director in the undergrad program. And so I just did anything I wanted and there was nobody in competition with me. And so everything that was good and wonderful and talented about me grew, and everything that was horrible and terrible about me also grew. But I got to do whatever I wanted and had, you know, I just really, all I cared about was the shows I was directing. I wasn't interested in academics or anything like that. But it was a great time for me. Flexing myself, you know.
How quickly after college did you make the move back east?
Right away. I mean, I didn't even graduate, actually. I was in my fourth year, but I was definitely going to be one of the many fifth-year seniors, if not sixth-year seniors. And I found out about the internship program at the McCarter Theater, where you could come for a season, which was about 9 months long, and they gave you a house to live in Princeton, and you made $75 a week. But, you know, you had a place to live and you could work a few extra hours, like in the box office or selling concessions to make a little extra money, because I had no money. So I applied for that internship and I got it. And it was great because it was so complimentary to what my experience in school had been. having to just be, just sitting on the floor in these rehearsals with these incredible artists. I mean, the first production I worked on there was David Laveau's production of Elektra, starring Zoe Caldwell and Claire Bloom and Steven Spinella and Maren Hinkle and Michael Kumsty and Pat Carroll and God, who else was in it? I mean, it's just the most amazing cast.
Wow.
And that moved to Broadway. And the second thing was a new play by Emily Mann, starring Elizabeth Marvel. And of course, I didn't even know who most of these people were because I only knew, musical. I mean, I could have told you everything Sally Mays had ever done, including her like summer stock and like high school credits, but I didn't know who the fuck Elizabeth Marvel was. But I was smart enough to appreciate it, at least as it was all, I was getting to be a fly on the wall for these things. And then I moved right to New York I was basically in New York there because I worked more than full time, but every free moment that I wasn't working, I was on the New Jersey Transit into the city to see, Parade at Lincoln Center and A New Brain and, Titanic and all those wonderful shows that were on Broadway at that time.
When did you first then, in those trips into the city, you were aware of cabaret already, but when did you start really noticing the art form or seeing the art form?
It started while I was still at McCarter for sure, because the thing that my friends and I would do is we would go, a bunch of them were people I'd gone to college with who were either in grad school at NYU or were doing the AMDA program.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would come into the city and I would stay at their apartments if I stayed overnight, because we would go to shows. And then after the show, we would go to 88's.
Mm-hmm.
And I was absolutely in love with 88's. I mean, I'd been to a piano bar, Martuni's, in San Francisco, but that I was the biggest expert at Martuni's. I would be like, I want to sing Buenos Aires, and they'd be like, we don't know it. Like here at 88's, I mean, these people were like the real deal. I mean, and a lot of them are people that I still see in the cabaret community now. But I was just, I was just so blown away by the talent and the wealth of knowledge and the tight-knit of the community, and they seem to all know each other and know the same venues. And we didn't really have money to go upstairs and see the shows that were happening. I did see shows at Joe's Pub in that inaugural season. I got to see Audra McDonald and Leah Delaria. I think Faith Prince was the following year, but I saw a bunch of things at Joe's Pub. I saw Lance Horn. It was Lance Horn's Juilliard I guess like showcase, basically, starring Juilliard undergrad Sara Ramirez. And the opening number was this hilarious song about the heavy hitters who were in the audience, Mary Rogers and Adam Gettle and Michael John LaCusa and Jason Robert Brown. And I knew who all those people were, mostly from Audra McDonald's album. But I was so I was a little bit, I was very much looking against the glass, there and at 88's. But it was such a wonderful way to feel, because I'd been the big fish in the, it wasn't a small pond at Berkeley because it was 30,000 students in a public university, but it was a small pond of the theater students, so I really relished getting to just be in the presence of these artists that I just admired so much. And I was very comfortable, starting, really from the bottom in that way, just sort of slowly making my approach into that world. And then it was the same thing with the theater, because I worked for a year on the TV show Spin City. It was their last season that they were filming in New York. And just because the only theater jobs I had been offered coming out of McCarter were paying me they offered to pay $200 a week, which now I wasn't going to have a free place to live.
Right.
And, so I got a good job as an assistant to one of the executive producers of Spin City, which was cool for me to get to see that. It's just not something I was interested in. And I've always been someone who has a tremendous capacity for hard work on things I'm interested in. And I've never been good at showing up and doing the work when I don't care. And I didn't care. Now I would actually find it more interesting, but I didn't, even though Michael J. Fox and Heather Locklear were these people that I'd, been a fan of my whole life, it wasn't enough to keep me interested. Barry Bostwick, even Faith Prince and
Oh, so you
Richard.
had Faith Prince recurring.
Yeah, I mean that was my first exposure to Richard Kind, but Faith played his wife, and I was obsessed with her. But then I got a job assisting Lonnie Price when that season of Spin City was over, and the first thing I worked for him on was Sweeney Todd with Patti LuPone. So I was in, and Audra McDonald and Neil Patrick Harris and George Hearn and all these great people. But that was my first sort of New York theater job, and then I worked with Lonnie on a bunch of stuff. But honestly, even my very first night that I moved to New York City, actually, I hadn't found my apartment yet, and my friend had a place in the West Village, and she was on vacation or something for like 3 weeks. And so I got to stay on Grove Street for free for 3 weeks. And my very first night there, I remember going to the duplex just because I didn't even know that it was a cabaret venue. I just knew that it was a gay bar from the Rainbow Flag. But I walked in and Natalie Douglas was singing, and I'd never seen her. I didn't know who she was, but I, of course, was just transfixed. And I mean I was smitten. I mean I've never stopped just swooning from Natalie Douglas. And I don't know if it was that same night, but around that time I also discovered Rose's Turn, which I was really, and I did know who Terry White was, and I would just go crazy for her. And I loved Rose's Turn so much. Maybe not quite as much as 88's, but 88's closed that summer that I first moved to New York. So I didn't have many months of getting to go to 88's. But I had several years before Rose's Turn closed. So I loved it.
I came into the scene just a couple of months before Rose's Turn closed. So I never got to go down there.
Oh, that's too bad. Yeah.
It was because it was the staff of Mamas who brought me into the scene. And they were all like, you got to come downtown with us, come downtown with us.
Yeah.
And then we're closing next week. Don't worry about it.
Well, I had good times at Mama's then too. And that's when they had the other Mamas too on 10th Avenue, I think it was. It was like Mama's 2, or I forget what it was called. It had some cutesy name like that. But I mean, that's how much of a springtime of Don't Tell Mamas it was. There was 2 locations,
It's interesting to me, though, because you and I then had very similar beginnings in the cabaret community of the hanging out in the piano bars and getting to know the scene through that entrance.
Well, because I couldn't afford to buy tickets to the Carlisle or Feinstein's at the Regency. And I managed to see a couple of shows, various ways over those years, but very few. And then I would go to Joe's Pub a lot at that time, but that was, I was at the duplex and the piano bars every week,
When did you decide that you were going to start working in the field of cabaret?
It really found me. I was, the first play I had been assisting Lonnie for a couple of years, and we worked on a class act through Manhattan Theater Club and Broadway, and then the Pasadena Playhouse in Tokyo. And throughout that time we were doing, after doing Sweeney Todd at the New York Philharmonic, we did it with the San Francisco Symphony and the Ravinia Festival and for public television. And then the next of the Sondheim shows he did with Patti LuPone and George Hearn was A Little Night Music at the Ravinia Festival, which I also assisted him on, but that was my final thing with him. But through that time, he was the artistic director of a company that's no longer existent that had been on Lafayette across from the Public called Musical Theater Works. And so we did a lot of readings and cool projects there where I got to know a lot of actors and stuff. And when I decided in 2002 that I didn't want to be an assistant anymore, people thought it was crazy because Lonnie's upcoming season he was directing 2 Broadway shows. He was doing Master Harold and the Boys with Danny Glover, and he was doing Urban Cowboy. But I was just done with assisting. I felt like my heart wasn't in it anymore, and I just was itching to direct. And so I got a job waiting tables, and I started just directing readings of plays because I felt that I didn't know anybody writing musicals. And I felt that I had to direct original work because I didn't think I could do Hello Dolly and some, showcase production in a rehearsal studio or whatever. And the first show that I got past the sort of reading phase was this play called Joy that I had fallen in love with in San Francisco under the title The Joy of Gay Sex. And someone had told me that you could do a equity showcase production where you didn't have to pay the actors, and then there were just strict limits on how long you could run and how much money you could spend on everything else. So I managed to get people from the reading to invest money so we could do the equity showcase production. And then from that, we managed to raise enough money to move it to the Actors Playhouse across the street from the duplex, which is now Playhouse Bar. But that had been the dream for a gay play because it was where Naked Boy Singing had been, and originally Torch Song Trilogy had been there in the 80s and whatever. It had a long, beautiful history as a gay playhouse mostly, and all the Howard Crabtree shows had been there in the 90s, making porn. Before we even moved there, though, it was in the showcase production at the duplex at the Producers Club on 44th Street. Which I had chosen just because it was a package deal. You didn't have to get your own insurance policy if you went to the Producers Club. I didn't know enough to know that people were like, ugh, the Producers Club, what are you doing there? I was like, it's a great bargain. But one of the things I had worked on at the McCarter was a workshop of a new Polly Penn musical called Night Governess, based on this Louisa May Alcott book, Behind a Mask. And it was directed by the brilliant Andre Arnott, who tragically died later that year. So that the following season, when McCarter mounted Night Governess on its main stage, he was not around. So that production, which was wonderful, was directed by, I want to say, Lisa Peterson. God damn it. I'm going to get it wrong. Anyway, but that was a wonderful production. But both the workshop I worked on and that later production starred Judy Blazer. And I mean, there was wonderful people in that workshop. Merle Louise was in it, and Emily Skinner, and Alma Cuervo, and anyway. But Judy Blazer, I fell in love with, and we stayed in touch. And I had done a few readings of plays that I directed that Judy starred in the city, and then she came to the opening night of Joy, and she brought Lance Horn. And I think she was trying to fix us up. I don't know if she was trying to make a love connection or what. Maybe it was artistic. But I was a fan of his because I'd seen his Juilliard showcase. Right. And so then Lance and I started talking about how we could work together. And he had, after doing several shows at Joe's Pub that were showcases of his work as a songwriter, he was getting ready to do a gig. It was the Memorial Day of 2005. That was going to be him performing his own stuff. And he was going to get a rock band together. And Randy Red was going to play keyboards with him and be a backup singer. And so he wanted to know if I would direct that. And so that was the first thing I directed in Cabaret, was Lance Horn's show at Joe's Pub. And then that had sold out. So we had taken a gig for it across the street. And actually, he got a gig to do it at the Blue Whale on Fire Island in advance of the Joe's Pub show, just piano only, just so he could have a chance to perform in front of an audience before the debut in the city. And so that was my first trip to Fire Island, was me and Lance like in a room at the Botel. And that was, a crazy adventure, but it helped me fall in love with Cabaret. I'll say that much. But Lance and I had a great time with his show at Joe's Pub, and then their Joe's Pub wasn't available for the immediate extension that we wanted, but there was a venue at the time called Dominion across the street from, it was like next door to, what's it called? The theater that the Blue Man Group is in. It was underneath the Indochine restaurant. And so we did a few shows there over the next few months. And then there was one of the actors in Joy was Natalie Joy Johnson. And I'd seen her do a show at Feinstein's at the Regency with her co-star from Bear, Adam Fleming. And I mean, Adam is great, no offense to Adam, but I was like, Natalie is a powerhouse. This should be a Cabaret star. So then Natalie and I worked on her solo Cabaret debut that I directed at Joe's Pub. And that was like the February of 2006. And I started finding, it's much easier for me to get Cabaret gigs going because I don't have to do a reading and I don't have to do a showcase and I don't have to raise any money. All I have to do is email the Joe's Pub people and they'll give me a date. And so then and then we'd had success with Natalie's show. And so then I started getting asked to do a bunch of cabaret shows, to do John Hill's show and to do Our Lady J's show and to do Lindsay Alley's show. And then I was just doing all this cabaret work in 2006. And that's when I had the idea to do, to recreate Patti LuPone's Les Mouches act, and to do it with Leslie Kritzer. And so then that was a big success that I had in cabaret. So then I mean, the other shows had done very well too, but that, people had really paid attention to, and we won a MAC award, a special Time Out New York MAC award for that. And I really felt like at that point, Michael Feinstein, I mean, a lot of people came, but I remember thinking when Michael Feinstein and Justin Bond and Seth Rudetsky were all there, I was like, I'm in cabaret now.
What was that experience like then as that was growing?
It was amazing. I mean, I had really not had any expectations of it. I had just been frustrated because while it had been amazing that we raised $500,000 and moved Joy off Broadway to a commercial run after being the toast of talkinbroadway.com, and Theater Mania and stuff, we promptly flopped off Broadway. And so it was daunting to imagine getting something like that together again. But I'd had more luck in cabaret, and I felt like the play readings I was doing, if Joy didn't make it, which I thought was like a really funny comedy that really worked, I really didn't know how these scripts that I was reading were going to make it, And at the time, I had never written anything and I didn't identify as a writer. So I didn't know how to get myself scripts that were better, and I was just feeling kind of burnt out, but I was obsessed with Patti LuPone at Les Mouches because as a Patti fan in college, I had I would go to the UC Berkeley library and I would read all her reviews of her whole career on microfiche. And so then just people don't even know what microfiche is anymore, but it was I would be looking at this machine where they'd scan, basically it was almost like a photo negative, of these periodical pieces. And so then when I was in New York, I went to the Lincoln Center Library and, I watched the Evita video, which of course was not Patti LuPone. And, but I did watch Company with Julie Wilson. But I asked to see the press files on Patti LuPone, and they actually weren't on microfiche. They just gave me these big manila folders. And there were all these reviews of her cabaret acts from the 80s, which were at Les Mouches and at a venue that was called the Savoy, which is now the Hudson Theater and had been historically the Hudson Theater, and from The Bottom Line. And they were all pretty much all pans. But, I was dazzled by the stories of what kind of stuff she had been doing in these clubs. And then I went to the Triton Gallery and I said, do you have any Patti LuPone posters? And they sold me a poster for her act at Les Mouches, which I was, Michelle remembers microfiche. I'm glad I'm not the only, dinosaur. But I was fascinated by this gorgeous Les Mouches poster that had, that on it said Saturdays at midnight following her performance in Evita, which just blew my mind. I mean, just even the fact that it said following her performance in Evita, just that, her performance in Evita was a vocabulary that I spoke. I'd never seen it in print, like that anyone else would even, that the fact that theoretically audiences read that and be like, of course, because she's in Evita. I was walking around UC Berkeley going, Patti LuPone was in Evita. And people were like, what's Evita? Who's Patti LuPone? So that blew my mind. And then, of course, the fact that the show was at midnight. So So then when I was Lonnie's assistant and got to know Patty, she had I mean, honestly, I think just because she was cheap at the time, her management wanted her to have a reel of her film and television work and whatever. I'm sure they must have gotten quotes from whoever did the reels for their other clients. I mean, they were Viking management at the time, which Lisa Loosemore, who I think is with ICM now, but she their other clients were like Judy Kuhn and Faith Prince and I don't even remember who else, but I'm sure whoever they hired for Faith Prince's reel, probably the quote was, $5,000 or something. And Patty said, fuck no, I'm not paying that. But she loved me and knew I was obsessed with her. And she said, let's give it to Ben Rimalower. So she gave me this job, which I thought was a lot of money, but I'm sure it was way less than whatever they were quoted, to take, just clips of her on Frasier and her on, Law and Order and edit a reel. It just all had to be recent. I remember I wanted to put on like Driving Miss Daisy and Life Goes On, and they were like, no, it's got to be like she has to look the way she looks now. And this was 2001. And so I did that, and then Patty said, I'm going to give you all my videos so you can put them all on DVD for me. And so she gave me these 4 brown paper supermarket bags filled with everything she'd ever done, that her husband had like taped off of TV, it'd be like videos that had like, some Rangers games and, in between, Tony Awards performances, and this was before YouTube. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it was stuff I'd never seen before. And when I sent her the list of everything that I was, cataloging it so that I could organize it into DVDs for her, because I had to sort of come up with a roadmap of what I was gonna group together, collating the videos, I guess you could say, digitally. She said, you forgot Les Mouches. And I was like, no, I would not forget Les Mouches. You didn't give me Les Mouches. But she was like, it's there. And sure enough, it was like buried after like, 4 hours of Rangers games and like, 45 minutes of just like blank space and static. There was this sort of grainy, crazy Les Mouches video, and it just blew my mind. I mean, I was obsessed with it. I mean, I just memorized it. And I'd had this fantasy about just seeing it live again, and I didn't know what that meant. But I had started thinking about that more because Rufus Wainwright had done Judy Garland at Carnegie Hall. And I knew that wasn't what I wanted to do with this, but just the fact that he had done that made me think you could do something along those lines. And then I had been directing these readings of this musical, The Road to Ruin by Bill Zeffiro, who's a well-known cabaret musical director and composer. And Bill was the sort of sub-pianist for Kitty Carlisle Hart when she couldn't get her primary pianist at the time, who was David Lewis, and who had been the musical director for everything in the 70s, but including Patti LuPone at Les Mouches in 1980. And we did a special presentation of The Road to Ruin at Kitty Carlisle Hart's gracious apartment on Madison Avenue in 2006. And so at that reading, I was introduced to David Lewis, and Kitty introduced us. And I said, oh my God, you're David Lewis of Les Mouches fame. And he couldn't believe, of course, that I knew that, because nobody knew that, And so then and it was the same week that I was going to Chicago to see Patty in the Ravinia Festival production of Gypsy. And so she's always on my mind, but that was such a magical experience because she didn't have the rights to do it in New York, and she and Arthur Lawrence had not yet mended their feud. So there was just a lot of sort of magical Patti LuPone kind of cult energy, random people calling Arthur Lawrence's answering machine at intermission, being like, Arthur, you don't know me, but you are really making a mistake. You know, there was just sort of crazy Patti LuPone kamikaze energy. And I thought, God, this could be a show. Les Mouches could be a show. And I worked with Leslie Kritzer as Lonnie's assistant on some readings. And I just felt that she was the right person. And so I got her excited about it, and then I got Patty's permission, and then and got David Lewis we asked him for his charts. He said he didn't have them, but that he'd be happy to make them up as we went along and to do the show with us, which was more than we dreamed. So we did it with David, and I really had no expectation or even hope that it would be a hit. I just wanted to see it on stage. I could get drunk with Leslie at the duplex and go, you know, sing Defying Gravity or whatever the hell I would ask her to sing. But I couldn't tell her to sing Les Mouches. She didn't know those songs and those arrangements, you know? So this was a way for me to make her take my request just because I wanted to watch it. And if anything, I probably expected it not to be a success because it seemed like something that maybe only I would be interested in. But people loved it, and you know, so it was. And you know, then it got to be so successful that Patti changed her mind about letting us do it. And it was unfortunate because we had recorded it. It hadn't come out yet, but Kurt Deutsch had spent money, you know, recording live 2 performances of it late in our Joe's Pub run, which at that time was only ending because Leslie was going to San Francisco with the out-of-town tryout of Legally Blonde. And we were doing it there at the Plush Room in San Francisco, doing Les Mouches there while she was on a night off from Legally Blonde. But then Patti freaked out about us recording it, even though Kurt had gotten her, I don't know what, he had told her about it. But she changed her mind. And then Kurt and I both didn't want to damage our relationships with Patti, which was, you know, difficult for Leslie because there was a good argument to be made that we had the right. This was David Lewis's work, honestly. You know, I mean, it was Patti's name and persona, but David had written the show, all of it, you know, the banter and everything. So that was hard between me and Leslie and Kurt and Leslie, and extremely disappointing because Joe's Pub had offered us to come back once Legally Blonde was open and do every Saturday at midnight starting in May, open-ended, but or April, whenever Legally Blonde was opening. But so that was a real disappointment, and it felt like a real setback, and I felt really hurt that Patti didn't just put my needs above her own. You know, you know, many people would say naively, but I mean, that was hard for me because Patti to me before then had just been like my fairy godmother or something. I mean, she was just a magical creature that just made my dreams come true. But then I worked with Patti and Kurt on taking David's original tapes of Patti's Les Mouches performances because she had run for 26 weeks or more than that. And she had done 20, whatever. She had done, you know, it had been for almost a year that original engagement had run. And so he had many different nights of it. And so I worked with Kurt and I was a co-producer to release an album of Patti's Les Mouches, which is funny to me now because people, Broadway fans know Patti LuPone at Les Mouches, you know, and it really wasn't known. And it, you know, it has a lot to do with Leslie Kritzer.
As you were in those days of starting to direct in Cabaret, outside of Leslie in this show, what drew you to particular artists? What made you go, I want to work with that person on a solo show?
I mean, honestly, I think I was in the beginning, I mean, this sounds so stupid, but full disclosure, like, well, in general, I had an attitude about directing, which was I was a nobody. I had no credits. And everything I had ever directed, I had learned so much from. And I felt extremely confident that any show I would direct would teach me so much. And I felt extremely confident that I would bring a lot to any project I could get the gig on, you know? And so I really just was trying to get every directing job I could in any capacity that I could. And once I realized that Cabaret was a way, there were fewer gatekeepers blocking me, that was something that really appealed to me. And because I had gone to a school where I was the only student director in the theater department, and then I'd been an assistant on all these shows with all these famous older people, but I had been the only kid in the room. You know, on Spin City, when I'd been an assistant, there were 4 executive producers. I was one of their assistants. The others had assistants also. And the stars all had assistants. And the writers all had assistants. And there were assistants that worked in the accounting departments and assistants that worked in the costume department. And there was all these people that were my age who were all, you know, when we would all get drunk together at the rap parties. You know, we weren't invited to sit at the table with Michael J. Fox and Heather Locklear, but we were a huge... There was drama and romance and intrigue and gossip, you know, but there was, I was in a community of young people who were all working together, and I loved that. And then I didn't have that when I went to work in theater, because I was an assistant and the other people in the room were George Hearn and Audra McDonald, you know, and who, despite how it may look, I am younger than Audra McDonald, you know, and that was more obvious in 2000 than it is in 2023. So then when I was on my own trying to launch my directing career, I started seeing shows like at Ars Nova and stuff like that. And I discovered like the website Broadway World. And I saw there were all these people that were my age who all knew each other. You know, Jamie McGonigal and Max von Essen and, you know, Mandy Gonzalez and Julia Murney and, you know, Barrett Foa and, you know, I don't know, all these people that were, you know, in my age group, and they were all in this community that I was on the outside of. And there were all these sort of like photo coverage, you know, I mean, these photos were not in, they were not on Page 6, but they were on BroadwayWorld.com, and I wanted to be on BroadwayWorld.com. That was what I wanted, and I was like, I'm going to make it happen. And Cabaret really felt like a way to do that, and I think that I was reaching out to artists. I had gotten this job directing this benefit called the Shine Awards that stood for Sexual Health in Entertainment, and it was at the House of Blues in Hollywood. And it was an award show that was recognizing TV executives and creatives and film executives and creatives who had done good modeling of sexuality for young people on television. That didn't just have to be queer representation. It could be a girl getting an abortion or a boy buying condoms or, you know, anything that was just creating healthy ideas for young people. And so I got the job directing this show, and I needed to find, I was producing it and directing it. And I had to find all the presenters and everything for the awards and the performers. And so I chose people, I mean, I first put asks out to like, you know, I don't know, really famous people, but as no's were coming in and the show was getting closer, I started going out to people that I thought I had a better shot of. So like I had Lorna Luft sing the opening number because I got her, you know, and I thought, who's my favorite comedian that might do this gig? And I had just seen Seth Rudetsky's one-man show, Rhapsody and Seth, at the Actors Playhouse. And so I didn't know him, but I got his information from Lonnie or somebody and reached out, and Seth did the gig, and Seth and I had a great time together. I mean, I still to this day am good friends with Seth, and we had a really fun time working on that show together, and he was amazing, and he got to, you know, be seen in front of this audience of like people that, you know, were good for him to be seen by in the industry. So he was grateful to me, but I mean, I was grateful to him because he killed this gig, and, you know, it just made me look good that the show was so funny because of Seth. And so then Seth was the musical director. Sutton Foster was getting ready to leave Thoroughly Modern Millie. And her good friend that she'd, I think, grown up with was the artistic director of this children's theater company in Washington Heights or Harlem, I think, called the Pied Piper Children's Theater. And she was going to put on a benefit of Snoopy the musical
Oh,
that
I
she
love
was going to
Snoopy.
star in. And Seth Rudetsky was going to musical direct. And to benefit the Pied Piper Children's Theater. And so Peter Flynn, who had directed a lot of the Actors Fund benefit concerts that Seth had musically directed, was going to direct it. But then he got an acting gig that he couldn't say no to at some regional theater, I think. And so they were looking for another director. And Seth said, let's get Ben Rimalower. And of course, nobody knew who I was. I hadn't done anything yet at that point. I had just been Lonnie's assistant. But Seth said, Ben will do a good job with this. He's the right person. And Sutton trusted him. And so I did that show. And I think that helped me going forward because it was a calling card to say I had worked with Sutton and Christian Borle with Snoopy and Ann Harada and Jen Cody and Hunter Foster and Devin May from Bat Boy, who was so great. And and I got to do this sort of high profile show at Symphony Space. And, I think the show came out great and the writers loved it, and Larry Grossman. And, but I had all these people's phone numbers. And so, I was just reaching out. Ann Harada, will you do a cabaret show for me? Christian Borle, and all these people were saying no, but that was sort of those were my first round of calls. And then, my second round was a wider net, until I started catching some fish, and then as I did more cabaret shows, I got more offers. But I don't know, did that answer your question? I think I got
yeah, no, it does.
Yeah.
Of how you were getting to the directing side of things. As it's continued, I have to ask, how did directing for Countess Luann come about?
So random. I have a friend from AA, like not even a good friend, like somebody I just went to meetings with, who came to Patty Issues at the Duplex when I had first started doing it in 2012 and said, oh, this is so great. And she wasn't a theater person. She was like what does she do? I don't know. I think she's like, I don't even know what her job is. Like, but she loved Patty Issues, and then she wanted to come back and bring her father because her parents live in LA, but her father was coming to visit, and he's like an old hippie filmmaker, and a really small scale independent filmmaker. But she thought he would like the show, as a writer and an artist, and so I was happy that she was bringing her father. And then after the show, we were standing upstairs at the Duplex talking. And he said, oh, I really, I would love you to meet my friend. She loves cabaret, and I know she sort of wanted to do an act over the years, and maybe you guys could work together. And at this point, this was 2012. I mean, I was already like, I directed a million cabaret shows. I wasn't looking for a gig with somebody's friend. I was like, okay, thanks. Yeah. And he was like, well, she's on a reality show. You might know her. And I was like, what reality show? And because I was a big Housewives fan, because I didn't really watch other reality shows except RuPaul's Drag Race, but I watched several of the Housewives franchises. I mean, I still do. And he said New York, and I said, is it Luann? And he said, yeah. And I was like, oh my God, set it up. So then he emailed for the three of us to get drinks, but so we made a date over email, and then she had to cancel last minute. And then for years, I would just once in a while invite her to whatever I was doing. And sometimes she would write back and sometimes she wouldn't. She never came. And then she started inviting me to things like different parties she would be having. And I don't think I ever went to anything. And then at one point I saw that she was doing a show at 54 Below. And so I reached out to her and I didn't hear back. And then the show didn't happen for whatever reason. And then just one day, I just decided to send her an email just giving her an update. I think I was doing some stuff that I thought was fancy or that she'd be impressed by. I'd had meetings with Kathleen Turner about working on her cabaret show. And the person that had introduced us had sort of miscommunicated it, and I thought I was having a meeting about directing her show, and she thought we were having meetings about me like co-writing it or something. I don't know. It wound up not working out. But at the time, I thought I was going to be directing Kathleen Turner's Cabaret show, and I had been working as a day job producing audiobooks at Simon and Schuster, and so I had just done audiobooks that I'd produced and directed for Bethany Frankel from Real Housewives of New York and for Teresa Giudice from Real Housewives of New Jersey. And I'd even been on Real Housewives of New Jersey because they covered Teresa recording her audiobook. And so I was dropping all that and whatever else I was working on at the time in this like long sort of braggy email to Luann. And I don't know, it caught her attention. And so we started having these phone chats then about her doing a cabaret show. And then when she was really ready to do it, I introduced her to Rich Aaronstein because I thought it'd be good for her to have somebody to book it. And, you know, I don't think he got her. He made us do all these sort of jump through all these hoops, writing up all these proposals for him, and then said that nobody wanted her. And she was like all discouraged. And I said, I don't know about that. And so I just emailed people at 54 Below myself. I mean, I'd done stuff there, and they were like, this sounds amazing. And so then we took the booking, and she got the lowest possible deal that 54 Below gives out. And then it sold out like crazy. And then it became this huge extension. We were adding another 10 shows, another 10 shows, right. Another 10 shows. And then she got a fancy agent at Gersh, and we were going on tour everywhere. And then in the other cities, I booked her on tour in San Francisco and LA at cabaret venues there. I got her at Feinstein's at the Nico because I had done Patty Issues there. And I got her at what's it called? The cabaret room in Hollywood. I never remember the name of it. Oh, Catalina Jazz Club. And but then her agent at Gersh was booking us at the Chicago Theater and the Wiltern in LA and the Warner in DC and the Majestic down in Dallas. And, you know, and she was selling out these huge theaters. And it was a very interesting experience. I mean, I'd never been around that. I'd done that one episode of New Jersey Housewives with Teresa, and I'd done a couple of audiobooks with both Teresa and Bethany, but those had been sort of isolated experiences where I wasn't really so much brought into their lives. I mean, even though Teresa had been very kind to me and came to see Patty Issues actually and got me a bunch of press, I didn't go to her house, you know. But Luann and I became very close, and, you know, it was a sort of rock and roller coaster period in Luann's life. She was famously arrested and went to rehab a couple of times, and a lot of stuff was going on, a lot of it covered on television. But it was an amazing job for me. And I was really on the road with her because the show was Countess and Friends. And so it was really different every night, depending on where we were and who was in it. And so, I mean, I got paid very well for that, you know, in a way that I wouldn't have been if I had just sort of turned in a script and, you know, rehearsed her in it and then stayed home. So it was a great experience for me. I had done performances of my shows in various places, including, I mean, even overseas, you know, but they had been, you know, self-produced kind of one-offs here and there. And, you know, now I was really on tour in a way, you know, that I'd never done. So it was really cool. And I learned a lot, and it's fascinating to experience those audiences. I mean, it was unlike anything that I'd ever seen in any other cabaret show. And, you know, and, it was an interesting experience that I'm so grateful that I had it. And yeah.
Whether it's Luann or Leslie or Natalie Joy, when you're working with a client for a cabaret show as a director, what is your philosophy of the art form? What are you trying to, what's your goal with an artist in the cabaret setting?
That's a good question. I guess I have a few sort of thoughts about that. I mean, the first thing that I'll say across the board, which there are exceptions to, for example, Leslie Kritzer's Patti LuPone at Les Mouches, where I felt that, you know, on stage in the moment, Leslie was the primary artist. but in terms of creating the show, I felt that I was, you know. And I think we were on the same page about that. But in general, in Cabaret, I feel that the performer is the primary artist in a way that, you know, on an actor in a play or musical isn't. I mean, that then it's the playwright, you know, but through, you know, through the director's vision. But I feel that it's really important that the performer is the primary artist in the Cabaret show, and everything really has to flow authentically from them. And so, you know, my job is really to help them, you know, depending on how much of a writer they are or whether there's a writer involved, you know, but to some extent or to a large extent, my job is to help them channel that in a way that has an arc, to be a show that has a point and goes somewhere, and that is clear to an audience in a way that the audience can follow. And you know, and of course that is entertaining, although presumably I wouldn't be doing a show with them if I didn't think that they at least had that much, you know, although there were jobs I took at various points, you know, where I was paid for working with somebody that didn't necessarily have that. And I learned a lot from those for sure. So that's one thing that I really believe about it. And then another thing that I would say the two other things then are, one is that Cabaret doesn't mean anything anymore. That, you know, some people think it's a bad word and some people think it's a good word, and it means something different to everybody. But the thing is, it doesn't mean something consistent to everybody. And in the old days, when the popular songs of the day could then be heard sung by singers in clubs, and, you know, you'd go to the, I don't know, the El Morocco or whatever, and it was equal parts hearing music that you would also hear on the radio, sung possibly by different people than you would hear it sung by on the radio, but everybody knew the songs already, and it was the same group of songs essentially. And it was about seeing and being seen and, you know, all that stuff. That's not what Cabaret is anymore, you know. And that I think that the artist has to reinvent the wheel with every single Cabaret show for every single audience. And they have to establish what they need, what they want the genre to be for themselves, for that show. And they have to establish that universe for the audience in a way that they can't take for granted the audience comes in. I mean, I'll never forget, we were doing Luann's show in San Francisco. She had a nephew or a cousin's kid or something, straight guy in his 20s who lived in the Bay Area and came to see his famous aunt or cousin or whatever, and brought his girlfriend. And I remember just him saying to me in the green room after the show, like, it's just so amazing. I've never seen a thing where you could go and hear somebody sing songs they didn't write. Some of them I even knew. And it was like, yeah, but it was like, people, that's, you know, there, and, you know, and it's all different things, you know, whether there's somebody coming in being like, well, it's got to be American Songbook, you know, or somebody coming in expecting the artist to sing with the storytelling vibe of a Nancy Lamott. We're expecting the audience to sing with the musical panache of a Billy Stritch. You know, those are all different things, and not everybody can or even wants to do all those things. But I think they have to be clear on what thing they're doing and how to establish that for the audience so they can relax and feel that they're getting the thing they're supposed to be getting, you know?
What's the true version of them that they can present?
Exactly. You know, or in this incarnation, because maybe there's somebody that can do different things, you know? And then the other thing I think is that I find it harder and harder to not be bored in a Broadway play nowadays. In this golden age of television, when I can turn on HBO Max or whatever the fuck it's called this week, or I can turn on AMC or Netflix or Prime or Hulu, and I can see the most incredible writing and the most incredible acting and just be riveted. It's hard to justify spending $150 to sit in an uncomfortable seat where I can't press pause, you know, and possibly can be exposed to diseases, you know, and I have to go into fucking Times Square. That better be so special. So what is it that makes it so special? It's live performance has to offer me something that I can't get anywhere else, you know? And the you see different ways that different plays and musicals that are successful find that, and it's rare that I'm not bored in a show that didn't find some way to deliver that, and I think that Cabaret, in a sense, has a leg up in that competition because, the audience is really always going to be the second person in a cabaret show,
Yeah.
and that can be true in theater too, but it's always true in cabaret. And if it's not true, usually that something's wrong. I get nervous when cabaret artists say things to me like, well, I want a fourth wall, it's like,
That's not the art form. Yeah.
and maybe there's shows that do that in their own brilliant ways, but they certainly better be a deft artist who knows they're violating that principle and doing it for a good reason and doing it with care, and so I think that Cabaret starts off ahead of the game in that way because they sing to us, and so then we're automatically present and participatory in the experience in a way that we don't get to be in many shows or in any TV shows, and so that's special. And I think that in this digital age, it's even more special. I certainly, that's what, God, how I craved that experience during the pandemic,
Right.
and I don't take it for granted having the luxury of seeing Cabaret any night of the week, again. And it's wonderful, and I treasure that, and I'm so happy to be able to work in it.
How has that philosophy of the art form and what you're drawn to as a director transferred into now your work as a booking manager?
Not all that much. I mean, it informs the shows that I think are more artistically exciting. But I don't expect shows to conform to my sensibility as a booking manager, and I know there's a lot of people who have had a lot of creative and commercial success who are quite different from my taste. And I hope to make money off of them too. And I respect the ability to, I respect their right to do their work, and I'm happy to help facilitate that, and bring audiences to them. I suppose when all things are equal, I will favor the things that are my choice, but that's not often the case. Usually there are really objective factors that come before it gets to that point, in terms of weighing things. And, and I've got a lot of slots to fill. I can do, what is it? 15 shows a week. Is that right? 6. And the numbers are different at the two clubs. I always get confused. No, I can do 16 shows a week at the Green Room 42 and almost that many per week at Chelsea Table and Stage. So, I have a lot more slots than I can use most weeks. So, if anyone is watching this and wants to do a cabaret show, actually email me, but please email me.
Do you have a screening process?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want anybody that's going to bring shame upon the Green Room 42. I think one of the wonderful things about Cabaret is how not gate kept it is, but that also means there's the potential for things that I would think don't reflect well upon us. So I want to do art. They don't have to be my aesthetic, but they have to be an aesthetic, and I have to know that they can get an audience. And not every show has to sell out, but they have to sell.
Right.
And so I try to find as many different ways as possible to make educated guesses about what they'll sell. And the reality of the world we live in today is that social media is one of the easiest ways to determine that, but it's not a surefire thing. And there are artists that can sell that don't have social media presences. So I try to, look very hard at all the ways to estimate that before writing people off.
Has your own, this is the transition, has your own performance experience also formed that worldview of the art form?
No, I wouldn't say that it has actually. I think my own performance experience felt like, or feels like, but I mean, I've done more performance than Patty Issues. I had a second show, Bad with Money, and I had other things I performed in since then. But because Patty Issues was my first time writing other than journalistic writing, and my first time performing in my whole adult professional career, they both, it felt like such a coming together of everything that I had been taking in and learning up until then. And the only ways that it really informed me new were just that it gave me so much more respect for performers in ways that I had never dreamt that they should be respected. I mean, I always respected performers, but the difficulty and the bravery of that, and just the sheer energy that it takes, I didn't have nearly enough estimation of. And so it changed that. But I think that it just took me further along the road of and certainly my shows were things where I really talked to the audience. I mean, really needed, I need to make eye contact with individual people in the audience, as many as possible, the entire duration of my shows, in order for me to feel good about the performance. And that's something that I valued in performers and performances before becoming a performer, and just treasured as a performer myself. So and having that realization shored up these beliefs I had about the lack of a fourth wall in Cabaret, but it didn't change it. It just sort of deepened my belief in that.
What was the impetus to write Patty Issues?
Well, after Leslie Kritzer's Patti LuPone at Les Mouches, my appetite was whet to be the primary artist on a show again, but I didn't think of myself as a writer, so I didn't know what that would be. And people kept asking me to direct shows for them that were sort of copycats of that. Or they would recommend to me that I come up with some other copycat of that to do, where we would recreate some legendary or obscure real life performance, or even event, like something like the first wig sock, or, people had all these sort of ideas for me that I would spend time sort of percolating on. But I just kept coming back to the fact that I did Les Mouches because I desperately wanted to watch Leslie do that entire act, and I didn't know how to make her learn all that material for my own enjoyment. And so I didn't know what to do. And then when Twitter started, I found myself not calculating, that's the wrong word, but composing my tweets in a way that I hadn't with, like, I don't know, my Facebook statuses, and I enjoyed that act. And a friend asked me to write a blog for his website in like 2009. So I started doing that. And then I started thinking, maybe I can write. I'd always wanted to be a playwright and sort of been a slacker and had no confidence and was lazy about it in college, and then had never pursued anything like that. And so now I was writing these blog posts, and then I started writing for Huffington Post, which was really like blogging, and so I was thinking that way, and having nothing to do with that, I had all these Patti LuPone videos that she had given me, and my friends would come over and get drunk, and we would watch these videos, and I would sort of introduce the videos. And I thought, God, how I could make money is I could show these videos at the Laurie Beachman and then just introduce them and kind of do like a Seth Rudetsky style deconstruction, but it would just all be positive and it would all be Patty. And so I emailed Phil Bond, who at the time was booking the Laurie Beachman, and he said, that sounds like fun. When do you want to do it? And I said, let me get organized. And so I emailed Patty to ask her permission, because I certainly wasn't going to go down that route again. And she said, let me see a draft. And I was thinking I was just going to do bullet points like on my phone, but I thought, all right, I'll start writing a draft. But what I found when I was writing these video introductions was that they were not what I thought they were going to be. And they were much more about my own life and not about Patty. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. I should keep going down this road, because it was the first time I had written, each video introduction was no longer than an individual blog post, but it was the first time I'd written ones, that things that length, but that went together. And so then when I started to work with my friend Aaron Mark, who had been my assistant on Leslie Kritzer's Patti LuPone at Les Mouches and on the Natalie Joy Johnson show and a few other things, but had now become a director in his own right. And I knew that I wanted him to direct. Well, actually, the first person that I had working with me as a director on Patti Issues, just me reading these monologues in my apartment, getting feedback, was Jeffrey Self. And then he moved to California. And then I was working with Erin Markey, the brilliant actor and writer. And then she was busy with other projects, and I was needy for more attention. So I went from Erin Markey to Aaron Mark. And he really encouraged me to just do a reading of it without the videos, because I had enough material that he felt it would work. It was long enough without videos. And that he suspected that I would agree with him. He was very deft. He was very gentle in his touch. He didn't make me face the scary possibility that the show would ultimately have no videos, but that was his secret end game. But sure enough, once I did the first reading just for friends, I thought, oh, this doesn't need videos. And then Adam Feldman gave me the title, Patti Issues. So then that was how it came together. And Aaron Mark has gone quite far. I mean, after Patti Issues, well, he also directed my other show, Bad with Money, but he wrote and directed these solo plays for these actors, starting with Tom Hewitt in this play, Another Medea, and then Daphne Rubin Vega in this thing called Empanada Loca. And then Allison Fraser in this thing called Squeamish, and they were all very successful. And Daphne was nominated for some awards for Empanada Loca, which then he expanded into a podcast. And now it's a fabulous new Prime series that Aaron is the executive producer and head writer of, called The Horror of Dolores Roach, starring Justina Machado and actually Jeffrey Self, funny enough. But it's on Prime, and it's an amazing series. It's based on Sweeney Todd, but it's present day, set in New York City, and it's incredible. And anyway, Aaron's brilliant. But that was how Patti Issues began.
Once because you did it everywhere, you did tons of performances down at the Duplex, and then you took it on the road and to other countries. But then you did an interesting thing for a solo, such a personal piece, and you handed it off to another performer.
Well, what happened was that I was trying to get it published. And a lot of the play publishing companies were like, we don't do solo shows. And I was like, it's not a cabaret act, it's a piece of theater. And it can work with other actors. And they didn't believe me. And so I wanted to prove that. And also I had gigs out of town, and I was going to be leaving town, and I didn't want to close it at the Duplex because people were still coming and I was still making money. And so I thought that Robin would be fabulous. I'd been an admirer of his, and we were friendly, and Aaron had worked with him actually. And so we asked Robin to do it, and he said yes. And he was absolutely amazing. I mean, a lot of ways he was much better than I could ever be. I mean, he's such a fantastic actor. And I thought it really proved my point, but they still didn't publish it. that was very cool to watch. And then I've seen it done by a couple of other actors over the years in out of town productions.
They didn't publish it, but you do have the audiobook version available, right?
Yes, it was published as an audiobook. Me doing it live at the Duplex, both Patty Issues and Bad with Money.
So get that wherever you buy your audiobooks or podcasts. It's available, it's out there. Make sure to listen to it. I can't believe our time has flown by, but we are nearing the end of our time together. And I do have to have some time for some audience questions. But I want to talk about some things you're working on right now before we go. Tell us about Giants in the Sky.
Giants in the Sky. Well, speaking of podcasts, this is the thing that I'm working on most right now creatively, besides the Green Room 42 and Chelsea Table and Stage. And it's a podcast. It's called Giants in the Sky, How Sondheim and Lapine Went into the Woods. And it's all about the making of the original production of Into the Woods. And it's just me talking to all the artists and professionals who worked on the show in any capacity, from on stage to behind the scenes. I mean, sadly, I started recording it after Sondheim had passed. But episode 1 is my interview with James Lapine. And I've got most of the original cast on there, and I'm still doing more interviews. So Bernadette, I'm coming for you. But Joanna Gleason and Chip Zion and, all these wonderful people, and the designers and the choreographer and, the rehearsal pianist and the understudies and the producers. And there's 15 episodes out now, and I've got another 15 in the can, and I'm still doing interviews. And it's just been so fascinating. And it's an idea that I've had kicking around for several years. I mean, it's funny. I mean, I love Into the Woods. I'm a huge Sondheim fan, but Into the Woods is not even in my top 5 favorite Sondheim shows.
Oh,
it might be number 6, but it is not in my top 5. But I've always just been so fascinated and had so many questions about the origin of it. And in 2021, James Lapine published an incredible book called Putting It Together. That's an oral history of Sunday in the Park with George. And it's just really transcripts of his conversations with everybody who worked on that show in any capacity, including artists that were fired or that had, contemptuous relationships with him. And but he has these conversations all these decades later, and it's absolutely fascinating. I mean, James Lapine I'm obsessed with him, but it's just so wonderful. And I really was hoping that he was going to do the same thing for Into the Woods. And when I found out that he wasn't, I thought, well, there's an audiobook of Lapine's book, Putting It Together. And it's funny because they have actors reading the roles of these people.
Oh.
And so I thought, well, God, it would be great to do a podcast that was the actual people, So that's what I'm doing. And it's been wonderful. I mean, I've, worked on a couple of podcasts in the past, and it's very difficult. There's so many podcasts out there. It's hard to get people to listen to yours, to mine. And I've been so gratified by how positive the response to this one has been. And the thing is, a lot of people love Into the Woods, and I guess a lot of people either have the same questions I had or are interested in hearing the answers. And I mean, it actually reminds me of Leslie Kritzer as Patti LuPone at Les Mouches, in the sense that it's just this weird thing that I did to satisfy my own interest, and it's been really well received. So that's been gratifying.
It's amazing. And I hope everyone who is listening goes and checks out the podcast. Also, go find the audiobook of Patty Issues and Bad with Money so you can see those or hear those. I, again, can't believe we have gone this long. I normally have clips throughout, but the conversation has been flowing. So we will have one clip. You were the first episode to only have one clip.
Honored.
If you are watching and have a question, you can put that in a private chat message to me. And when we come back after our clip, I will ask the audience questions. Before we get to that clip, Ben, every episode of Cabaret Conversations has ended with the exact same question. In a few words, in a sentence, 2 at most, what is cabaret?
Ask Luann's nephew. It's I think that cabaret is it's an intimate performing art, usually involving music, but not necessarily, that happens somewhere over drinks.
I like that. It's a good answer. Here is our clip for the evening, our one, which is so the first time this has happened. But here is a clip from Patty Issues.
Oh, Evita, don't close. I'm a big boy now. I'm 5. But my stupid father takes me away from Evita and moves us to stupid California. My father is never home. He's an OBGYN at Cedars-Sinai in Beverly Hills, so he's out a lot in the middle of the night delivering babies. But he's also out a lot in the middle of the night fucking guys. Or, to be precise, getting fucked by guys. My father's a bottom. I don't learn that particular detail until later. But before I even know what gay is, I know that my father, who cooks and cleans and cries at movies, is different from other men. Of course, I'm different too. I mean, I like to play with girls, to play girl things. When no one else is home and the house is totally silent, I sprawl on the floor of my sister Lucy's room, playing with her Barbies for hours. Although I have no Barbies of my own, I assure you that when I play with my He-Man action figures, Evil Lynn plays a much more central role than on a television series. Evil Lynn has balls. Balls like Evita. My father has no balls. I have an image of the kind of man I want to be when I grow up, and it isn't him. I look up to men who drink coffee and read the newspaper, men like my grandfathers, men like my mom. Men who pick the top hat in Monopoly, not the bitch terrier.
Well, Ben, I hope you've gotten to grow up to be the man you wanted to be, because you are a leader in our art form, and I'm so thrilled to have you as part of Cabaret Conversations.
Thank you for having me.
Well, our first audience question has come in, and that is, if Into the Woods isn't in your top 5 Sondheim shows, what is your top 5?
Yes. So it's gonna be hard to put them in order, but I will just say what they are, which because it is like favorite children in a way. I mean, I know Into the Woods isn't in the top 5, but the top 5 would be Follies, Sunday in the Park with George, Sweeney Todd, Merrily We Roll Along, and Company, of course. Oh my God. I mean, and honestly, I think maybe A Little Night Music would be number 6. So maybe Into the Woods is only number 7.
We can sit and have this debate some night together.
Yeah.
Next question that's come in is, what do you think the biggest pitfalls of cabaret are for an artist?
Geez, that's a good one. I think the biggest pitfalls of cabaret are focusing on the voice. Some of the best cabaret shows I've ever seen have been with people that were kind of crappy singers. And some of the worst ones I've seen have been with people that actually had really incredible voices. And I think that a lot of what draws us to cabaret is our desire to sing, which of course is wonderful. But I think that there's altogether too much emphasis on that, and it can trip people up. Even some of the greats. I mean, even sometimes Patti LuPone.
I completely agree with you. It's what makes, to me, the art form, when it's working its best, is when the emphasis on the lyrics and the storytelling is the most important part of it.
Yeah.
The next one flows off of that. What draws you to a cabaret performer? What to you makes an exceptional cabaret performance?
What draws me to a cabaret performer is their use of the lyrics and the music, but their use of the songs to convey something that feels important to me in the moment. And that can mean so many different things
Mhm.
from different artists. It's hard to if I start to be more specific about what I mean, it starts to be limited to just the way that I would come at it, which is not necessary for me to enjoy it.
Mhm.
There's artists that I really wouldn't be able to explain that are very moving to me, and engaging to me. And another thing that I will say I really love in Cabaret is that I love hearing music that I know. I appreciate music more when I already know it. And
Mm.
so it's very satisfying in Cabaret, whether the person is doing a traditional show or a non-traditional show. If it's songs that I'm familiar with, it's weird because in a way it should be the opposite, right? Like if I'm hearing the song for the first time, I should have an easier time believing that the artist is making it up as they go along. It should seem more authentic and more spontaneous if I don't know it. But in a way, it's like, there's something literary about dramatic texts. And I would include songs as dramatic texts, especially, of course, if they're show tunes. But in any case, they're written and composed. And so, at least for me, in my slow brain, when I already know the text, I can keep up, because it's one of the things that's hard about Shakespeare, even just compared to things that are not in iambic pentameter or whatever, things that are written more conversationally. It's difficult because in the rhythm, you can lose it.
Mhm.
It's easier when people can talk slow or speak in more natural speaking rhythms. It's easier to follow every nuance of the words. But when things are in the rhythm of iambic pentameter or the rhythm of music, the train is going.
Mhm.
And so, through no fault of the performer, I, as an audience member, may not be able to always keep up. Maybe I love something they said or the way they said it so much that my brain goes off on a tangent and then I've missed the next line,
Mhm.
And so when it's almost like following along, reading it, when I already know the text, as I do with songs that are familiar to me, I'm not going to lose that, and I think it's why people enjoy seeing Shakespeare multiple times the same piece and enjoy seeing musicals multiple times the same piece. I think that's a part of it. And
That's when you can start peeling layers back off of it.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
But we'll open it up if anyone has another question, if they would like to put that in the chat, or I suppose if you want to join us, you can always turn your camera on and join us. While you were thinking about that, if there's any other audience questions, I'm going to do a little housekeeping from the 92nd Street Y. Cabaret Conversations is taking a break next month because I will be away teaching, but we will be back in September with James Jackson and John Andrew Morrison, both from A Strange Loop, who have fantastic solo careers in cabaret, but also do a joint show together, a series together. We'll be talking about all of that. And then in October, I will be joined by Lucy Arnez. Those will both be on sale within the next coming weeks, so take a look out for that. Also, through the 92nd Street Y's cabaret programming, we have an amazing masterclass with Faith Prince coming up in September, so be on the lookout for that. Faith will be joined by myself and Alex Ryback in that weekend-long workshop. So be sure to check out all of those things. And once again, thank you to my guest this evening, the amazing Ben Rimalower. Friend, it's so great to get your thoughts on this art form recorded for the 92nd Street Y.
Thank you for having me. This has been so much fun.
Thank you for being here. Have a great night, everybody. See you at the next Cabaret Conversations.